time now, I think, to welcome our expert panel. And the panel is going to be talking about transition in transportation today. And I'd like to welcome our panel moderator to the stage, Cara Clairman. Cara is president and CEO of Plug and Drive, certainly no stranger to this space and an expert in her own right. And Cara, I think I can speak for everyone. We're very much interested in what you and the panel are going to be discussing. So with that, I'm going to give the stage to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. We have a pretty exciting lineup here with some great experts to talk to you about the intersection of connected transportation and electric vehicles, topic near and dear to my heart. The way this is going to run is I'm going to just quickly introduce the panelists very, very briefly, and then I'm going to give them each an opportunity just to talk a little bit more for maybe 1 minute or so on their individual expertise, and then we're going to get into some discussion of a few questions that we have, and we're really hoping that this will be interactive and that you will participate and put your questions down for us to ask the panelists. So hop right into it now. First up, we have Mike Branch. He's the VP of Data Analytics at Geotab. And then second up, we have Tanya Skilton. She's the Director of Electric Vehicle Critical Materials for General Motors. And third, last but not least, we have Ivano Labricciosa. He's a utility industry expert with about 40 years of experience in the sector, most recently CEO at Oshawa Power. And so I'm going to start with Mike and give him a minute or two just to introduce himself and talk about his expertise. Hi, Mike.
Hi there, Cara. Wonderful. Nice to be here, folks, all virtually. I'll be attending later on this evening as well, too, in Hamilton. So hopefully I can see a few of you folks out there as well. So I head up data and analytics at Geotab. For those of you who don't know anything about Geotab, we're an Oakville-based Canadian company. We monitor over 3 million vehicles across the globe. So we're connected to vehicles not only through the OBD port, through our Go devices, but through OEM connections as well too. So, and the primary reason that a lot of folks choose to work with Geotab is to help them out from a safety perspective, their transition to electric vehicles. So sustainability is a big thing for a lot of our customers. We work with some of the largest fleets in the entire world, UPS, PepsiCo, all large customers of ours. And my team in specific, we look at that data from across these 3 million vehicles and help them from a number of different perspectives, everything ranging from predictive maintenance to helping them drive safer, developing all sorts of AI models. So I've got a team of data scientists, data engineers, product people, all working with me to help us drive some really interesting solutions for our customers. By trade, I'm an engineer and went back to school for a master's in management in AI. So pleasure to be here today, Cara.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And going to get into some really interesting stuff later with you. Let's just let Tanya have a moment to introduce herself. Tanya Skilton can welcome you to the stage.
Thank you, Cara. Thanks for having me. I, like Cara said, I lead the sourcing of critical materials for General Motors when it comes to battery electrification. So whether you've been reading about it or not, there's a massive race on to electrify. Everyone's wanting to electrify their production, and countries are wanting companies to electrify. And with all of us rushing to do that in the same time frame, we're all kind of getting into this competitive mode to secure the critical minerals that it takes to create battery cells and electrification sustainably and economically, so that we can all afford those vehicles. And that race is kind of what I'm on now. It is a foot race, and we're kind of working very hard. General Motors wants to make sure that we are secure to be able to make good on our electrification promises out as the decade rolls on. So very exciting to be part of that. I've been at GM for just under 6 years and have done some very exciting work here. This is a company that is completely transforming into the future. And so all the work that I've been involved with so far has been topical autonomous vehicles. The previous presenter was fascinating, as well as some of the data work that we're doing, creating new commercial products out of the data that we gather from our vehicles. Prior to that was with Rio Tinto, which is a global mining company. And so that's helpful in my current role for sure. And I am really excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, we have Ivano Labricciosa. He's going to give us a minute on his background.
Hey, Cara, how are you doing? And hi to the rest of the panel. It's great to get back up in front of people to at least talk about one of my favorite topics, which is electrification, and certainly as it relates to electric vehicles. What you're hearing out there from most utilities, my experience is entirely electric utilities, whether it's consulting or executive leadership or planning or strategy. It's right down this path of autonomous electric mobility. I like calling it electric mobility because it's just more than vehicles, but it is electrification, and utilities are the connectors for that electrification. So very exciting times. Most utilities are talking about the challenge of connecting, and you hear that in the public space. Having enough runway and time to actually build infrastructure, and necessarily having enough money in the hoppers to actually get it all done. And I'd like to take a different perspective when I get to this stage of talking about the grid and saying that the grid is ready, the grid will be ready. There are some things that have to be done, but essentially it's a new day when it comes to planning for electrification, at least for electric mobility. And utilities have to have different skills and tool sets to basically make that challenge achievable. And I think it can be. So I'm looking forward to that discussion with the rest of the panel, and I'll hand it back to Cara.
Thanks, Ivano. Well, so you see, we have some amazing expertise here to discuss this topic. I'm going to start with you, Mike, and just get a little bit more granular on the data sharing. We know this is challenging because of privacy concerns and data residency mandates, etc. But we need it in order to really effectively succeed when it comes to electrification and, of course, connected and autonomous. So I'm just wondering if you could just talk about some of these issues, the challenges with data sharing, and what can be done about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in specific in this world of kind of connected, autonomous electric vehicles, data sharing is really crucial for us to be able to realize some of the benefits, both from a sustainability perspective, from an economic perspective. A lot of challenges, I think, exist there. Starting with, disparate legislation for privacy as well, too, and keeping up to date with all of these things. There's so much changing across the globe. Not only at a national level, but at a subnational level as well, too. And we see that in different legislation, and understanding too what data is considered private when it comes to geolocation data isn't always a well understood and well crafted concept. I always use the example of you can't treat all geolocation data the same. If I'm taking myself as an example, my drive from my home to my office every single day, absolutely, that trail is absolutely identifiable. If I'm looking at a number of instances where people are slamming on their brakes at an intersection, it's a huge value add from a safety perspective, but so long as you have an appropriate mix of vehicles, that doesn't constitute private data. So this understanding of geolocation data from a privacy context is really important. And then what that also, there's a huge play there when it comes to data residency as well, because for those of you unfamiliar with data residency, it's the fact that when your data is collected, it, depending on the legislation in the specific country, or again, sometimes at the subnational level, that data has to go and hit servers in that country and stay and reside within that country. So what that ends up doing is there's a huge duplication in infrastructure that needs to happen as well too. So you have to really think through these things very, very carefully, right? And if you're transmitting any data to the cloud, it has to hit in the jurisdiction of choice, right? So this, if you think about all the things that need to happen, all your data pipelines, all your AI models, everything, if you're doing things in the cloud, you really have to think through that carefully and have a mechanism to deploy these things at scale. Because it is important, and we're seeing these things. It's not that we're seeing, I think, concerns around data residency or privacy subsiding. It's only increasing, right? And we're seeing a lot more vested, and it should be, right? There's a huge, I think, need for us to understand consent mechanisms across the board, specifically when you talk about car sharing capabilities. If I'm operating as a user of a car sharing service, do I consent that that data is being shared? When does that stop? When does that end? And so making sure we're transparent about that in the market as well. So there's a lot to uncover there. I think it's good we're having a lot of discussion around this. I'm seeing a lot more movement in this direction towards developing, solutions that people are implying privacy by design principles at the beginning of a lot of these decisions, so that we're not trying to do things after the fact. I think you try to do things after the fact, it ends up creating a bit of a nightmare. So these are some of the things that I'm certainly seeing in the industry. Certainly challenges, but I think challenges that can be overcome for sure.
I mean, it seems like a whole new world of issues that we really never had to face before. And I'm just wondering, is there an appropriate regulator or regulatory regime to deal with this? Because this isn't stuff that we've had, for example, through the energy regulator or, the safety regulator in the past.
Well, you've got, so I think a lot of the discussion around this really started, it didn't start, but a lot more like Oshawa with regards to the GDPR in Europe, CPRA in California. And we're seeing a lot more regulation start to happen in other areas of the globe here right now. So I think you will see a lot more regulation of across the globe. We're seeing it again. Fines are starting to get pushed out to organizations. We see it, almost on a monthly basis. So I think, yes, we will definitely see a lot more regulation of this as we move forward. We have to be very, very cautious. It's our duty to protect the privacy and the data of the subjects that we're working with. And I think it's something that, has to be done at the design stage of development.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And I think, in a way, we're looking at a lot of challenges today. We're going to be talking about many different challenges to this happening, electrification, autonomous, but at the same time, opportunities, right? That we have to remember that with every one of these challenges comes opportunity. And I want to move to Tanya, who's facing, I think, quite a significant challenge in terms of getting those critical minerals and materials to be able to compete in this race to electrification. Tanya, maybe you could talk a little bit about the supply side challenges that you face, both in terms of the supply chain, but also in terms of just like getting those vehicles to market.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Cara. So I guess I'll start a little bit at the creation of the battery. We need batteries for battery electrification, and the approach that we've taken is to not wait necessarily for the market to offer batteries or cells or the sub materials. We've kind of gone out and started to partner with people that are SMEs in this field and try to kind of take charge of our own destiny in a sense that way. So we have a joint venture with LG Energy Solutions for the creation of cells, and we're building plants here in North America. It's the first plant is up and running and started production last month, and the second plant will complete next year. We have another one coming online 2024, and those are creating the cells. General Motors then puts the actual full battery module together. But then going down to the next level, we've also got relationships that we've announced with the likes of LG Chemical and POSCO Chemical. In fact, we're building a cathode active materials plant up in Canada that'll start producing in 2025 in a joint venture with POSCO Chemical. We're also working with LG Chem to localize their cathode production into North America as well. So we're going down into the supply chain and even further. So we're at the level of now talking with, contracting with, investing in mining companies, refining companies, so that we can get our hands on that entire value chain down. We're literally talking about ground to vehicle level, so that we're not at the mercy of this race that I talked about with our ability to try and serve customers. And what that does is it allows us to be very deliberate about who we work with, whether they align with us on values, and particularly values around the environment and social issues around labor practices and governance and transparency. It's almost the table stakes to have a conversation with us on those topics first before we go any further into the commercial discussions. And we're being very deliberate, and that makes our job harder, because there certainly is nickel and lithium available in parts of the world, but those are not necessarily ESG compliant, or at least transparent enough for us to know for certain, ton by ton, whether or not we're bringing materials in that are responsible. And so that's kind of the landscape that we're working to, and working within the constraints that we've put on ourselves on top of the existing kind of supply constraints.
Yeah, right, for sure. And I guess that's one of the great opportunities for Canada here, is that if we can move quickly enough to offer some of those critical minerals, we know they exist here in Canada, but we've got to move it along to really get to work on making them available to folks like GM to actually help solve some of these ESG challenges you have. That's both a challenge but a great opportunity for Canadians, and I know there's lots of people working on that. Thanks, Tanya. And so now we've covered the data challenge, we've covered that the battery critical mineral challenge, all in 10 minutes. Ivano, what about the grid challenge? You hinted at it already. This is something I hear probably every day, as another reason why EVs are not ready for prime time, or whatever the concern might be. That, okay, well, it's all great, we'll have EVs, but how's the grid going to handle this, Ivano? How are we going to make this possible?
Yeah, that's a great point, Cara. I mean, you and I go back a long ways, and looking at starting this file, many years back, around getting EVs into the market space and getting ready. And it was all a challenge of getting your hands on an EV or getting it going. Now we're facing, and you're hearing it from utilities and others, you need billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure to get it going. And quite frankly, if you plan in the old way, the old methods, I think they're probably not that far off, where you have to sort of double the grid and double the size of everything, because the size of an EV is the size of your home. But here's the critical component, or here's the key challenge, is to be able to plan in new ways. And Mike touched on it in terms of data. And Tanya, I love Tanya's comment about, it's a macro micro thing, and sort of working the pieces all the way through. At the macro level, I mean, we know there's an energy crunch coming in. If you look at the macro side of generation and the challenges there around making sure that we had enough juice in the future, there's a challenge. Pickering coming offline, building new infrastructure. I'm there's no shortage of work to be done there, but I'm confident Ontario's got a legacy of being able to plan its grid, or plan out its supply side, no problem. We're an interconnected grid. We're connected with Upper New York State and across Canada. So I'm hopeful and confident that the ISO and the people behind the scenes at the macro level will find the juice to move it around. At the micro level, this is one where I have more experience in, it's about connections. And again, Ontario and utilities have a great history of connecting everything that needs to be connected to the grid over 100 years. And so we've never, ever failed to connect a customer. And I see EVs as another one of those customers, or another load that needs to be connected. We can do it. But like I said, the challenge will be to get planning going in the right way. The old models just won't work. You can't do an all or nothing play. If you consider it as all or nothing, then you're going to have to double every piece of infrastructure. I don't think we can afford that. But we know that the vehicle's not connected 100% of the time, every day, each day. And that really is consumer behaviors. And we need to know more about that. And there's enough cable and enough connections everywhere to be able to manage what we have. But the key is to be able to plan for it properly, new tools, knowing when it's going to be coming up and connecting, and then coordinating it with everybody else in the neighborhood that needs to do the same thing. So I'm looking to put together a new thought process around managing those connections as opposed to just oversizing the grid and overbuilding it. We can't afford it.
Yeah, actually, I couldn't agree more, Ivano. I mean, certainly having been involved in a bunch of multi-unit residential type installations for EVs, we see more and more folks looking at power sharing, power management. We realize you don't need to assume every single car will be all plugged in at the same time at 5 p.m. when people get home at the worst possible time for the grid. We make the most conservative assumptions, to protect the grid, which I understand. But now with these amazing technologies of power management, we can do it smarter.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, Mike will tell you that with more data, they can manage things. And Geotab's been in the business. I've known about them, and we've used them as a company, successful company. I mean, the early forms of Geotab, the data was pretty rudimentary, but look at it where it is today. Mike will tell you that there's the richness in the data has allowed them to be much better as a client-focused service provider.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, Ivano, I'm sure that we could talk all day about this, but of course, the EV battery also could perhaps help with peak shaving right here in Ontario and elsewhere if we have the ability to offer that battery back into the grid. And I honestly don't see this as some, futuristic state. I know this is possible. Can you just talk for a few minutes about what's possible there?
Absolutely. I mean, it's here's another challenge. We said the old models where it's either a load or it's not a load. It's either on or it's off. The batteries in the EVs are not like that. Batteries in EVs are an energy component. It could be a load or a source or a resource. And definitely utilities have been thinking about it, and there's applications out there. Europe has done a remarkable job. I mean, they're much closer to the line when it comes to managing energy. They've done a remarkable job doing vehicle to grid interface, and it's possible. It's not a utopian, Orwellian 2020 or 2050 sort of projection. It's here and now. So the question is there enough policy and enough incentives and enough capability in people managing what that relationship looks like? So again, it's on data or it's on incenting behaviors, not whether it's technically possible. It's technically possible, I'm convinced. The issue is going to be is, do consumers want to interact with their grid every day and manage that relationship, or should we let somebody else do that? That's a policy type initiative, and I think there's work being done there.
And we all know with the right economic incentive, consumers will behave appropriately. They already do take advantage of time of use pricing and will do so even more so, I think, once this ultra low price comes in. We do have a question from Isabella, and she's asking, I think this is really for Mike, how will bills C26 and 27 impact the telemetry solutions?
I mean, I think it goes to what I was saying before. There's not going to be a decrease in any legislation that is moving away from cybersecurity and privacy. So I think it puts more of an onus on connected vehicle organizations, telemetry organizations like Geotab to make sure that cybersecurity is one of the top things that we're looking at. We've gone through a number of different processes, changes and everything over the years. We've got FedRAMP compliance, which allows us to do a lot of work with the GSA in the United States of America. And so I see this really just doubling down on cybersecurity investment, privacy investment, everything that we have been really focused on to date. I think you will see that just continue to kind of be the case. It also raises the question of things like confidential compute and how that will maybe come to play in the telematics industry as well.
Interesting. Thank you. So look, we've spent a lot of our time so far on sort of the problems for the industry, the difficulties in getting the minerals and metals to be able to make the cars, the issues for the grid, issues how we're going to manage the data. These are all sort of, I would say, the business side. Let's talk for a bit about the consumer side. That's what I spend all my time. I was trying to help consumers see how they could get into these cars, getting the consumers excited about these cars, getting the butts in seats, so to speak. And one of the huge challenges we're facing is now there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of consumer interest, but a huge challenge with supply of vehicles. So perhaps Tanya, to kick it off, to just talk about what are we going to do in terms of supply? When do you think some of these challenges, because of the pandemic and supply chains and all that, are going to be resolved? And also pricing, which is another big challenge consumers face. We know EVs are a little bit more expensive to buy, even though they are much cheaper to operate. How are we going to help the consumer just get on board with that concept?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we are working very actively on, of course. So the supply chain challenges, there is I don't remember the name of the artist, but there's a rock star dude whose current tour is called Supply Chain Issues. So I was like, okay, I don't know if I needed that much validation in my role, really, but it's a reality. It's been hitting us. Semiconductors and things like that have been a topic that people have had to learn about, the things that a consumer person, the average person seeking mobility, should not have to worry about, but they have. And so we are part of the realization that we need to get much more active within our supply chain to have our fingers directly all the way down to the ground level for, in the case of battery electrification, but maybe even in the case of semiconductors and things like that, has come through these last few years of, okay, what does it really take to make sure that supply security serves our customers, so that people are not having to go back to the days of signing up for a vehicle months ahead of being able to hope to get a call from their dealer saying it's ready, or having to take custody of a vehicle that has been built shy. We call it building shy, with some components missing because we just simply can't put them in, and we'll call them later when we have them. That has been the reality for a couple of years. We are starting to see inventories build back up now, and we are getting past those with a lot of very difficult work that has had to happen behind the scenes, where, quite frankly, it's taken investment into those industries specifically directly from us, where previously we simply waited for the supply to show up in response to our demand. Now we're going in and investing strategically where we know there are these kinds of choke points, and we've become much more eyes wide open about them. So going forward, we are, focused on not having this situation happen again. And so it's not just with the critical materials, but we have entire teams now that are focused on resilience and sustainable supply through, scenarios, all the black swan type events that you could think of. Of course, there'll be one that we don't, but such is life. So that's kind of the supply, and making sure there's enough for people to be able to have choice and be able to purchase. From a cost perspective as well, what we're finding is that we actually need to step forward and invest in the industry directly ourselves, so that the customer is not hit and is not exposed to the volatility that exists in commodities markets. Commodities markets exist for very good reason. There are lots and lots of global buyers and sellers, and these are things that, as commodities, are tradable. But those markets also attract people, participants that are trying to hedge their own risks, and sometimes, dare I say it, speculation. So we are working directly in those markets to find ways to shield our supply, and therefore our customers, from the volatility that naturally happens in those sorts of open, pure demand and supply driven trading markets. And that's work that we will continue to do to kind of deepen our toolkit and our participation in that marketplace. And then maybe the third leg of that stool is in fact the public sector, the government world. And I have to say that the Canadian government generally, and the different provincial governments, have been tremendously supportive of electrification, and we find them to be fantastic partners to work with. But we are looking for policymakers to enable consumers to be able to take that extra step when the current situation has it that battery electric vehicles might be, in fact, slightly more expensive than a gas-powered vehicle to purchase, even if the overall cost of ownership eventually is better. So you've seen things recently in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, where there are, clean energy tax credits for consumers directly to them for procuring vehicles that are, that comply in various different, mostly environmental, social, governance sort of ways, and that then, but also enable them to make that step of conversion from gas to electric. And anybody that you've ever spoken with that has made that conversion, they don't ever want to go back. The experience is amazing, and also, to the earlier point of the vehicle is a storage device, and GM, in fact, just recently, 2 weeks ago, we launched a business around energy. So GM Energy is focused on both residential and commercial ability to kind of give power back into the grid, whether it's from the vehicle or from other battery electric platforms that we create from the vehicle platform that we've created.
Yeah, and as a proud Chevy Bolt owner myself, I can attest that I think people will, if they've tried electric, they'll never go back, and I certainly wouldn't. But and just to push a little further, and maybe either Ivano or Mike, if you have anything to add. I mean, what we hear from a lot of consumers, of course, they are comparing that sticker price, and we are, really encouraging. We have a tool on our website to help people calculate their total cost of ownership so they can really see the actual cost. But what we're finding is when people go to buy a car in the past, they never did math, and so that's just not something that people are in the habit of doing when they go choose a car. And how we can help them see the value of this car over time, as opposed to that upfront price. And what are we doing wrong here that we're not, because we're so fixated on that MSRP, that's what people are used to seeing. We need to promote it a different way. And I'd be interested to hear, your thoughts, any of you, on how can we do that more effectively.
I kind of like the comment Tanya made, as well as yourself, Cara, and I'll hand it off to Mike because it is data related. I mean, we all know in the ICE world of vehicles, you used to drive 10 more kilometers to save 1/10 of a cent on a liter of gas or something. The math didn't work out, but certainly people understood numbers, right? So the behavior, the consumer behavior is kind of weird in that respect. So your MSRP comment is people look at the sticker shock and then, make their decision on that, not on the life cycle cost or total cost of ownership. But GM is, doubling down and going, hey, there's an energy play here, which adds to the business case of the total cost of ownership. It creates opportunity. I've been telling people energy's not going to get really much cheaper. It's never really gone down in price. We might be able to bend the cost curve or avoid major investments, which will keep it reasonable. But again, building infrastructure, or everybody in the food chain of energy is looking at getting their hands on more money to keep building the grid or making it more reliable, or getting their hands on valuable energy. Well, it's there in the battery. And so that transactive energy component, I'm glad GM's in it because they're showing the value, will certainly add to the business case of an owner to basically go, hey, if I can transact on the grid and get an incentive for that, that's currently not in the business case, but that'll just add to the value of what your vehicle is going to be. It's more than just a ride now. It's an energy transactor.
So true. I mean, we did a study. It's available on the Plug and Drive website, showing the value to the grid that these batteries could provide, and showing the value to that EV owner. And the value to the EV owner, and this was very conservative assumptions, was almost $10,000 per year per car. Like it was a crazy huge amount. In fact, like over the life of the car, it's worth almost as much as the car cost. So there's a huge opportunity here that we're not quite taking advantage of. And then I'd just like to pivot maybe to one additional thought, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe I'm going a little outside the lines here, but one thing I'm hearing from a lot of buyers, a lot of people buy used cars. Not everyone buys a new car. right now used cars unfortunately are almost as expensive as used, are almost as expensive as new, because you can't get very many new cars, EV or gas. But I've heard a lot of complaining around financing, that the financing rates cost more for EVs than they do for gas cars. And what can we do to make it easier for Canadians to finance these cars? Lots of people do finance cars. So I'd be curious just to hear your thoughts. We've got to think about all the tools we have to help the consumer understand the economic benefit, but also for them to actually achieve it at a lower total cost. So I'd be interested in your thoughts. Oh, and just before any of you answer, I want to remind the audience that we're into the final stretch here, and it's your last chance to ask a question to these expert panelists. So please put your question in the chat.
One thing I did want to touch on before kind of hitting the financing topic was around that helping people understand the true value of the vehicle as well too. I think you're absolutely right. People don't do math when they go to the dealership oftentimes, and looking at that total cost of ownership is really important. And obviously we're seeing happening. There are other. Obviously, the MSRP is an important factor to consider for many people. Some of these EVs are very expensive. Some have come down in price quite a bit, which is nice to see. But there's also the side benefits as well, too, in terms of shortening your commute, because you can use an EV lane. In terms of what we're seeing, in other areas of the world as well, too, it is a must to have an EV in the downtown core, right? And so our businesses cannot operate without those EVs in the core. So while there's, it's certainly the costs can be a little bit more expensive depending on the model that you're choosing. There's also these side benefits in terms of productivity, being able to move around the city more effectively because new legislation is coming into place as well too. So I think those things are important to consider when you look at that total cost of ownership and what it does to your quality of life as well.
Yeah, never having to go to a gas station is a super huge benefit in my book. Even though people imagine like, oh, is it harder? It's like, no, I'm just plugging it in at home. I don't have to go anywhere. Fantastic.
I was gonna say, just think all the money you saved off those impulse buys when you go in to pay at the convenience store.
In fact, that is a big concern for those convenience stores, and they are putting in chargers for that reason. So yeah, any of your thoughts on ways to help make it more transparent to the consumer, the cost savings, the other benefits that Mike just brought up, or financing? What can we do to really help the consumer get on board here?
I think on the financing, it's a market-driven thing. It's like anything else. Something new tends to have a bit more risk around it because people are conservers. Institutions don't want to own your vehicle. They want you to make payments on it. So they don't want to be left with a car or an environmental liability in terms of how to deal with a battery. And the markets aren't mature yet in the used car market. So they're putting a premium on that risk in the financing side. I think it's temporary, Cara. I think your point is well taken. I think the financing institutions see it as a bit of a risk to go, hey, we might get left with a vehicle. Where do we sell it? How do we handle it? What do we do with it? So they're putting a premium on that, I think, to some extent. And that's why the financing's a bit tougher. But I think that'll disappear with time.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Ivano. That is right. I think it's temporary as well. We think it's temporary. And at the risk of sounding like a big fan of the Inflation Reduction Act, I'll just point to it because there is incentives there for used cars for the first time, used EVs as well. And it's not to the extent as a new EV, but it is a historic first. And obviously it's because policymakers as well have recognized that the vehicle market is a holistic market. There's new, there's used, and all of it factors into financiers' considerations. Resale values matter a lot, and so that is there to help. But the other thing to think about, which is a little bit down the track, but the battery is a source of the critical materials as well, that I'm out there sourcing virgin from the ground now, but eventually we'll be trying to source from the batteries themselves in the form of recyclable materials and creating a true closed loop. It is something that we absolutely in the industry, all the way down to the mining folks, believe is going to happen. It's almost, Thankfully, time is on our side on that question, because we need enough batteries to be out there and then coming back as end of life batteries, so that we can, extract those. And we kind of need that time in which to establish the infrastructure, prove out the technology, and know that it can be done economically. But certainly by end of decade, definitely into the next decade, people will start to see recycled material in their battery. And what that means from a end of life management of that asset, the vehicle, including the battery, is that it has resale value, or there's portions of that vehicle that have economic value beyond just being able to sell it to someone else to drive again. The battery itself can have a second life where it serves as a grid plug-in. And then once it's finally done serving all of its time, then it can come back to me and give me my materials back. And
all this will help reduce the price of the vehicle for the consumer as well. I agree, Tanya.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, well, I'm sure you folks know, but just for the audience, today the federal government makes its fiscal update, and used EVs have been on the agenda for rebates for a number of years now. It was in the mandate letters since 2019. Fingers crossed we're going to see something in there, but I agree. I think that would be a big plus. A few provinces have done it, and I'd love to see it at the federal level. Okay, well, we're down to our last few minutes here, so I want to give each of you a chance just to give a 1-minute wrap up. Mike, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and I'll kind of pull it back to the last topic of discussion too, and I think some of the things that we can do, speaking around fleets less so than consumers, that's what we deal a lot with, and helping them move electric. It's understanding what vehicles they can move to electric is so important. So we do things like electric vehicle suitability assessments, understanding that not every vehicle in a fleet right now actually can move to be electric, and once you do move to electric, they've got to be able to operate electric as well too, which is a challenge. We've seen cases where folks have thought they've plugged in and they haven't, and they've loaded the truck up and need to reload because it's not ready to go in the morning, right? So operating electric for fleets is a whole new mindset and shift. So it's all going to be powered by data. You have to understand these connections, and really excited for what's to come. I think we've got a really good world ahead of us, and we can really move the needle from a sustainability perspective. So again, thanks for having me on the panel today, Cara.
Pleasure. Thanks, Mike, for all your contributions. Ivano.
Yes, thank you. Look, from the grid's perspective, I think we're in good shape, reasonable shape. There's some still work to do. What I think we ought to concentrate on is putting together the better planning models, the newer planning tools needed to basically forecast and operate the grid in a better way. The juice is available. The connections are there. It just needs to be managed in a different way. That's kind of the short-term kind of perspective until you hit full deployment everywhere, where there will be some improvements to be made from the grid side. But I think right now the grid's ready in good shape. I'm going to put a plug in for Mike's side and going, hey, what's missing is the data, is the data side, and sharing that data. Where are they going? How often are they plugging in? What's the behavior? Do you want to put back into the grid? That's working with Tanya's side of the business. I think that's the work that's in front of us, and it's great. Ontario is in a real great position. It's clean, green energy. We're an energy society. We've been able to manage that for years. It drives our economy. This is a made in Ontario solution. And with GM putting the investments in batteries and assemblies of vehicle, I think we're in really, really good shape and seeing a stronger future for us.
Excellent. Thanks, Ivano. And last word to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Cara. First, I want to thank the panelists. It was great to meet you guys and to have this conversation. It is a multivariate opportunity, and it takes a full ecosystem. This is definitely a case of it takes a village to transform into this new energy space. I'm going to try and even answer. There's a question out there about protecting the consumer, protecting the driver in case of crash situations. Absolutely, the batteries are made with safety in mind, and the safety of the driver, safety of passengers and people around those vehicles is absolutely paramount. It has to come first before anything else. What I will say is that GM, we've kind of taken a really deep look at who we are and where we're going. And if you think about the vehicle, 100 years ago, if somebody said to you that there was this amazing invention that's coming onto the market that potentially will destroy the environment, could kill lots of people, but is going to be super convenient for you, you probably would have said, thanks, we could probably carry on with our bullock carts or horse carts or whatever it was that we were using more than 100 years ago. And we acknowledge that, while economies and the world has been able to move forward significantly because of mobility, that it has come with a cost. And General Motors is absolutely committed to our vision of zero crashes, zero collisions as part of it, zero emissions and zero congestion. And we're working very hard to embody that and to bring them to the fore and bring it to consumers in a way that they can truly afford it. Our tagline now for electrification is everybody in. And we really want to make it affordable and accessible to everyone, including all of those folks working down at a mine site that are pulling minerals out of the ground that enable this wonderful green transformation, but right now are maybe cut off from it. So lots to do there. It's world transforming stuff, and I can't believe I get to work in it. So it's great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to all three of you, Mike, Ivano, Tanya. Really fascinating discussion. Appreciate your time today and hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again for including this topic and having us. I'd like to pass it back to Chris.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks, Cara, for an excellent job at moderating our expert panel. I thought the conversation was very engaging and a lot of really, really interesting points. And there is a question I'd like to ask you, though, because I know you've been in this space for quite some time. And I'm wondering, in preparation for the panel or working through today and that, were there any particular points that either were maybe a surprise, a new revelation to you, or maybe was there something that you kind of were certain of, but now you're even more certain of in terms of the discussion?
Well, actually, I would say the area that I knew the least about prior to this would have been on the data side, and how much of that data actually is already available and being used. I mean, I sort of knew it was an issue, but I would say that was sort of eye-opening to me. And it's also really exciting to hear all about what GM is doing to try to advance its own supply chain. There were some surprises there, I would say. And it's all very exciting for the consumer. We want to get more cars available here as soon as possible. I'm glad to hear that it looks like that's loosening up, but I think consumers still have a little bit of a wait. But it's great to hear how much effort is being made to sort of address these issues.
Yeah, no, there certainly is that. That's for sure. And maybe I'd like to give you the last word in the panel. So in terms of summing it up, are there any sort of key points you would like the audience to just remember as a result of the panel?
Well, what I would like to just encourage people to do is, we hear a lot about the challenges, the barriers, but to also remember the amazing opportunities that electrification brings. And not only, local jobs, local infrastructure. By the way, when we put electricity into our cars, that money stays here in local jobs, local infrastructure. We're building cars here. We have the potential to mine the minerals here. We can really, it's a huge opportunity for Ontario and Canada. And so if your car's coming up and like you're a year away from your lease coming up, start looking into it now, because there is still a waiting list. And of course you can test drive with Plug and Drive, but then you can order it and you can be on that list. And that way you won't miss out when the time comes.
Absolutely. I'm glad you put that pitch in there, because I was going to suggest if people want to drive an electric car and try it out as they make that purchasing decision, they can. And what's the best way for them to connect up with Plug and Drive and make an appointment?
They can just go straight to pluganddrive.ca and you'll see book a test drive right there. The top
Perfect.
line.
So you're making it easy for everyone. Well, thanks so much, Cara, again, for your effort here. Really appreciate your participation, and we'll talk again soon.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you.